problem with that, do you?
I don't have any
No, I don't either. I think it was great. I think it was great. I understand that several of you hope that I continue the discussion of prophecy that I started on the 22nd of June, and that others feel that I left them hanging. Well, okay. Let's continue with the prophecy theme, but let me point out a couple of things before I do that might help you feel complete on this. Divination, which is the prediction of the future events, was very common in the ancient days. That is the field of astrology, reading the entrails of animals, and magic were all things that were readily accepted by the population until the Torah said, no, we're not going to do that. The only two recognized forms of prophecy that the Torah permits is the prophets and their prophecies, and the Urim and the Thummim, which are the casting of lots. If you read the Bible, you've read about the casting of lots. That doesn't mean they visit Vegas with the dice. The Urim and Thummim are vastly different. They are, and the reason they were approved is because in the wisdom of the Torah and in the wisdom of God, those were the two things that would predict what the thoughts of God were. So, with that said, prophecy itself is a very large body of study. It starts in Genesis, it continues all the way through Revelation, and you might even find it today, beyond Revelation. Another thing that I want to mention to you, which is a little bit, I guess, out of the ordinary, but we're going to talk about it today, is that the Bible also mentions a great number of animals. They call them either beasts or creatures, depending on who the translator is. And in my estimation, most of the ones that are mentioned are not beasts, they're creatures. And there's a difference, maybe without a distinction, but that's my feeling. They show up in prophecy, and they also show up in other places. For example, the creation story mentions a lot of animals. So, okay, with that, let's pick up where we left off, and let me just review a little bit. The deportation of the Jews by the Babylonians in 605 was not the first time that the Israelites faced a deportation. About 100 years earlier, the Assyrians conquered the Israelites, and they deported some 27,290 people. I don't know how they got the exact count, but that's what it appears to be, 27,290. They were transported, and one of the interesting things, and I didn't intend to mention this, but I am, is that a lot of those people intermarried and became what the Bible later calls Samaritans. And the Samaritans, you remember, are the people that the Jews wouldn't have anything to do with. The reason is because they intermarried. Now, what happened after the Assyrian Empire, and that was about the first major empire, discounting the Egyptian dynasties, we're not even going to go there, comes the Babylonians. They rebelled against the Assyrians because the Assyrians had conquered them. But the Babylonians weren't going to stand for that, so they kind of rebelled with the help of the Medes, who will appear later as we talk later, and began their history, the Babylonian history of empire building through conquest. It was in 605 BC, where we pick up our story of Daniel. And let me quick review what we talked about. Daniel was about 13 years old when he was taken from Israel to Babylon. And while he was there, Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king at the time, had a very frightening dream that he could not get any of his magicians or soothsayers or whatever in his court to interpret, because he asked them to do something that is impossible for a man to do. And that's tell another man or a woman what your dream was. Now, his soothsayer said to him, you tell us what the dream was and we'll interpret it for you. And he said, no, not going to do that, because I've listened to you before and your interpretations haven't always been right. So you tell me what the dream is and then you give me the interpretation. Well, they couldn't do it. And finally, Daniel appeared on the scene. And there's a little story that goes with that. We're not getting in there. But he was able to come before the king and say, King, I can tell you what your dream was. And he went ahead and told him what the dream was. You remember what we talked about on the 22nd? It was a statue of a man with a golden head, arms and chest of silver, a belly of brass, and iron legs with toes of a combination between iron and clay. Daniel told him what that dream was. That's what it was. And then he went on and he told him what it meant. He explained the dream, and then he interpreted the dream. Daniel, in his interpretation, actually details the conquest of four empires, and that is Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, which followed Babylon, the Greek Empire, which followed them, and lastly, the Roman Empire. Now, he explained all four of those, and we talked about all four of those, and then I guess what I left hanging was what happened after that. But I want you to notice, of the four empires that he discussed, the gold, silver, brass, and iron, what I want you to note two things. It decreased in value. Every empire decreased in value, from gold to silver, silver to brass, brass to iron. But also increased in strength. Silver is stronger than gold, brass is stronger than silver, iron is stronger than brass. Two things: decreased in value, increased in strength. Don't lose sight of that fact. I want to read some scripture to you, so if you are able, would you please stand? If you looked at your bulletin, you see that it's 34. Oh, let me look at it. 36 through 44. I'm going to add two verses to that. I'm going to start with verse 35 in chapter 2 and go to 45 in chapter 2. Follow along. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, and the silver. This is the toes now that he's getting to. And the gold, bronze, pieces together and became like chaff in the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. There's a whole message in there if you follow along with that. All of these empires have been destroyed by a stone that was cast without a human hand. But let's go ahead and continue. This is the dream, and we will tell you the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings. This is Daniel speaking, and he's laying it along a little thick because he's about to tell him some stuff that he might not want to hear. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowl of the heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over all. Thou art this head of gold. Man, he did lay it on thick, didn't he? Verse 39 says, And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subjecteth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break into pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of the potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with the miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with the miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heavens set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and shall consume all of these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. All of these things were predicted by Daniel, and every single one of them came true except one. He didn't have a kingdom to mention about this fifth empire. The fifth empire is the one of iron and clay toes. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. That has not come true yet. So, one of the tests of a true prophet is, are his prophecies or her prophecies true? Do they come exactly as they're predicted? Well, we have a pretty good record here in Daniel. The first four things are exactly as predicted, and we can verify that and swear to it because of history. And you can argue if you want to, and I don't, that because Daniel was present in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was later in the court of Belshazzar, who was the son of Nebuchadnezzar, and he saw the kingdom start to decline, he could almost see and be futurist, and just say, well, it's going to be the Medo-Persian Empire that's going to conquer them. And he'd be right. But he was dead before the Greeks came along and before the Roman Empire came along. So you can argue that one point if you want to. I don't. I firmly believe that when Daniel made the prediction, he predicted what God has told him about that dream. So, part of the discussion of what we had just read deals with many of the events of the end times, including what is known now as the 1,000-year reign of Christ, or the millennium. And we're not going to get there today. But I do want to tell you what's going to happen And I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to tell you, first of all, chapter 3. Well, let me clarify one thing. At the time of his interpretation, to me, this is very interesting. Remember, I told you that when he was placed in exile, he was about 13 years old, give or take a year or so. The time that this interpretation takes place, he's 83. So he's been there for 70 years. That 70 years ring a bell? 70 years is what the Babylonian exile was all about. They were going to be exiled for 70 years. Well, he's now there, and he stays not only through all the Babylonian kings, but he will stay through the Medo-Persian king, at least until he dies. And he'll die when he's about in his mid-90s. So he's going to be around a while. But he has made a way through the Babylonian Empire up until this time when he makes this interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar elevates him to a real position of power. And he maintained that. So we now know that he was not a young man when this took place. Chapter 3 tells a little bit about the jealous bureaucrats in Babylon. They plotted against Daniel's 3 friends, and if you'll remember, he had 3 friends with him that followed him and stayed with him because of their beliefs and the way they were raised in the Jewish faith. That story's in chapter 1. We're not going back there. But it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were his 3 friends. They had been with him on the exile. They had been with him at the test of whether or not they were going to be accepted into the Babylonian courts. They were thrown in because of their refusal to follow an edict that came down from Nebuchadnezzar, and they followed their Lord. They were thrown into the fiery furnace. And you probably know that story. I'm not going to repeat it. But that furnace was heated to 7 times its strength, and they were thrown in. And if you'll remember, there was a 4th party that walked around in there. And when they were taken out, there was not a hair on them that was singed or a thread on their cloaks that was burned. That's in chapter 3. That speaks of the steadfast faith in God and the salvation from destruction because of that belief. In chapter 4, Daniel explains another fearful dream with its interpretation to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's pride led to a downfall. And Daniel tells him, well, you're going to end up in the fields like an ox, and you're going to eat grass because Nebuchadnezzar has lost his faculties. That is exactly what happens. You'll find this in chapter 4. But his sanity was restored, and he came back, and he was placed back in power by his royals. When that happened, Nebuchadnezzar honored God. All, I might add, as Daniel foresaw. That's what chapter 4 is all about. In chapter 5, we meet a new guy, just pops up. This new guy is Belshazzar. And Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, there's a little bit of a story that goes on before we meet Belshazzar, and it's kind of off the record, but there was apparently another son that was older than Belshazzar that was actually the king, but he was so much enamored of hunting and fighting that he was never there. So Belshazzar, I guess, became king by default. At any rate, we find him named king of Babylon, Belshazzar, son of Nebuchadnezzar. He was a real rake. He was a drinker and a carouser. And as we meet him in this chapter 5, he's having a huge party. All of his friends are there. They're drinking and eating and having a great time. Let me tell you what happened during this. Well, I'm not going to call it an orgy. Great party. Sometime during this party, they were probably really in their cups. A hand of a man with a finger came and wrote on the wall. A moving finger. This was the finger of God. What did that finger say? It's not like the finger you get from drivers. It's a different finger. And this is what it said. It said, Mene, Mene, Tekel, and I don't know how to pronounce the last one. But this is what it meant. Daniel was called when that appeared, and he was asked to translate this, interpret it. His interpretation tells you that God was not pleased with Belshazzar, nor was he pleased with the Babylonian Empire. Because this is what it says and what it means. Mene means God has numbered the kingdom and finished it. That's kind of scary. If I'm Belshazzar, I'm sitting up and I'm taking notice of what he's saying. But Belshazzar didn't. The tekel, T-E-K-E-L, means that Belshazzar has been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Another thing that sitting there as Belshazzar, I'd be very concerned about that. And the last word, which is spelled U-P-H-A-R-S-I-N, means that the kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. You remember the silver arms and chest from chapter 2? Well, did that come true? Yeah, absolutely. This whole thing did. Because the very night that this happened, the Medes and Persians entered the city of Babylon, slew everybody, including Belshazzar, and the empire of Babylon was no more. That's exactly what Daniel told them. Now, chapter 6, this is a chapter that I'm sure you all know from your time in Sunday school. It's a story of Daniel being thrown to the lions. This is another instance where the bureaucrats plotted against him. And because they plotted against him, this was Darius, who was the king of the Medo-Persian Empire at the time, put out an edict about prayer. Daniel violated the edict. He stayed true to his calling by praying 3 times a day with the window open. Now, you might say, well, he did it to show off, but that's not why he did it. He did it because that was his routine for years. And he said, basically, I follow the Lord my God, and this is what I do. This is what I'm going to continue to do. Well, they found him guilty. They threw him in the lion's den, and you know the rest of the story. God closed the mouth of the lions, and Daniel came out okay. Now, chapter 7, we're going to talk a little bit about chapter 7, because there's some interesting stuff in here that really takes place that really goes back to chapter 2, but it's different a little bit. So we're going back to the first year of Belshazzar's reign. We know that he ruled at least 3 years. And I know that this is a little out of order. And I can't explain why it's out of order in the Bible, but it is. What I do know about it is that this is a fascinating chapter. And it begins with Daniel himself having a dream. And he dreamed of the sea boiling up by the winds that carried the sea up. And out of that sea came 4 beasts. Wow. Well, let's look at what those beasts were. The first beast, we're told, was like a lion, but it had wings. And at one point in time, the wings were plucked off of him, and the lion was made to stand up on its hind legs. You know what? That first beast represents Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. Their standard was a winged lion. The fact that the wings were plucked tells us something about what happened to them when the Medo-Persians took over. So the first beast that Daniel saw was this lion. But what about the second beast? And the other thing I want to mention is that the lion is also a symbol of majesty. The second beast that he saw, it says it was like a bear having 3 ribs in its teeth. And a voice said, don't know who that voice was, we're assuming that it was God, said, go or arise and devour much. What happened was the Medo-Persian Empire came along. And it's shown here as the bear is shown as its symbol. Now, I don't know if that was their standard or not, but the bear is shown as their symbol because the bear is different from a lion. The lion focuses solely on the prey, and it's individually. The bear is a crusher, very much like the Persian Empire. If you remember last week, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the fact that their army was 2.5 million. That's bigger than all of Babylon. But at any rate, the difference is that what the bear represents. The third critter, it says, was like a leopard having 4 wings and 4 heads, and dominion was given it to us. Can you guess what empire this represents? Well, it represents the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire at that time had a real conqueror. The conqueror had, and the name is just going right out of my head, but it's okay. The Greek Empire is shown as being a leopard, having 4 heads, and that means something. What does it mean? Well, it means this. It had, what did I say? Yeah, 4 wings. The 4 wings indicates that this beast, this leopard, was swift. The 4 heads indicates that it was intelligent. So this goes to the Greek Empire. They had a leader that, when he conquered, he moved swiftly, like a leopard. And he had 4 captains or generals, which brought intelligence. Now, he was only in power, and I just can't come up with his name, but he was only in power for a short period of time. He was about 29 years old when he died. These four took over, and they ruled for a while. This empire lasted somewhere around 270 years. He only ran it for 29 years, so the four ran it for a long time. And that's one of the reasons it failed, really, is because there was infighting among the four. There was death, and then they fought about it. But the point that I want you to see is that as Daniel describes the beast that he saw, he's also going back to the statue that he saw. And he's talking about the empires that are represented. Now, the fourth beast doesn't tell us a whole lot about what animal is involved, but this is what it says. The fourth beast was dreadful and terrible and exceedingly strong, with great teeth and 10 horns. Now we're getting down to something. If you'll remember, that fourth empire was the Roman Empire. And if you look at how it was described, these four beasts coming out, it spoke of majesty, it spoke of crushing strength, it spoke of wings and swiftness and heads of intelligence. And then it talks about a Roman Empire, which is the largest, the strongest, the most unified, and the longest lasting empire of the four that he talked about. I just want to mention to you, and I don't know if you picked up on this, but I don't want you to miss it. It seems to me that there is an unmistakable connection between the 10 toes of iron and clay and the 10 horns. In the ancient days, biblical times, horns usually meant kings or nations. So, what we're seeing here is that this fifth empire is thought to be, by many, to be an enlarged and rejuvenated Roman Empire. Only this is by another name, and that other name is the European Union. I don't know whether Daniel's right or not, but there's some indicators that he might very well be. The European Union has its roots in post-World War II, when 6 countries, not 10, when 6 countries got together and decided that it would be a good thing to integrate their coal and their steel industries because it would cut down on the chance of war. They did that. Then in 1951, there was a treaty in Rome that created what is called, or was called, the European Economic Community. And that sought to establish a common market. You've ever heard of common market? Over the years, now, the European Union has continued to refine itself, and it has grown today. It has 27 members. That's more than twice as many as Daniel foresaw. It's not 10 states, but it's possible that those 27 states may merge or leave or be absorbed or be conquered or somehow get reduced to number 10. And if that happens, then a charismatic leader is going to come forward, and he's going to be the ruler, because it says a single horn, that's one king, is going to arise. And that's one king is going to take 3 horns away, but he's going to be the master. This little horn, or this king, he's going to be speaking against the Most High, that's God. And he's going to wear out the saints of the Most High, that's us. And he's going to try to change the law and the time. And he's going to do that and be successful for what the Bible calls a time and times. Now, in symbolism, the time means a year in the Bible. So time is 1 year, times 2 years. So for 3 years, this guy, whoever he is, whoever rises to take the power is going to be in charge. And for 3 years, he's going to be pretty good. People are going to say, hey, I like this guy because there's food and there's good transportation. Everything is working well. At the end of 3 years, this guy is going to show his true colors. There's going to be 2 other people that come. We're not talking about them now, but there's going to be an Antichrist, a false prophet, and Satan. So you got 3 characters that are going to come up. And everything's going to change. Instead of something good, you're going to have to get a mark on you if you want to survive in his environment. And you all know what that mark is. It's the mark of the beast. Mark is 666. And if you don't have that, you're going to have a tough time making it in this period of time, which is, by the way, called the tribulation. And the first part of it's called the tribulation. The second part of it's called the Great Tribulation. Daniel predicts this. Daniel talks about this. Not in exact terms, but with these 10 countries, they have to come from somewhere. So where are they coming from? They're coming probably from the European Union. So Daniel has picked this up. Daniel in chapter 7, at verses 25 through 27, I'm not going to read that, but he tells us that the Antichrist will be destroyed and his kingdom will be given to the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom will be everlasting and all shall obey him. Daniel has a perfect track record so far. I got a minute or two. Let me just deviate a little bit and talk about this great tribulation. What's going to happen during that great tribulation period is God's going to move in. There's going to be 144,000 Jewish evangelists sent out into the world. Now, where do you get 144 from? Well, depending on who you listen to, it's a little bit different, but I'll tell you why I think it's this way, and it's pretty much as the Bible says, and I believe the Bible. There are 12 tribes in Judah, or in Israel. The Jews have 12 tribes. He's going to take 12,000 from each of the tribes. So 12 times 12,000, how many does that make? 144,000. And just think of this. You're not going to be here if you're taken up in the rapture, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But just think of 144 Jewish missionaries that will be streaming over all of the world during this great tribulation period. They're not going to be able to be harmed. So they have the freedom to speak out. Can you imagine what that's going to do? We might even get some converts to Christianity from this great tribulation period. Not only that, but the other thing that's going to happen is there's going to be two witnesses show up. And these two witnesses, and there's some argument about who these two witnesses might be. Ordinarily, it's thought to be Moses and Elijah. Quite likely it is. These two witnesses are going to stand and they're going to preach from town square in Jerusalem, where the Antichrist and Satan's located, and they're going to preach. And nothing can harm them until the time that Jesus says, okay. Then they'll be killed, they'll be resurrected, and they'll be taken to heaven. So it's going to be an interesting time. You're not going to be there, and you can, hopefully you're not going to be there. You can, and thank your stars that you're not going to be there. But if you have accepted Christ as your Lord and Savior, you're going to be raptured. Now, the Bible never talks about a rapture in those terms. The word rapture does not appear. But if you look at 1 Thessalonians in the 4th chapter, and I think it's the 16th verse, it says something to the effect that Jesus will be coming on the clouds, and the dead will rise first, and the rest will be taken up into heaven. Now, there is a puzzling statement there that I have never been able to figure out. And I don't think anybody else has figured it out either. And that statement about the rapture is that the dead will rise first. Why? Why is the dead going to rise? The only thing I can think of is they got 6 more feet to travel. I don't know if that's correct. Seriously, what I hope today is that this discussion that we've had will encourage you to go and study the book of Daniel. It's an amazing book. And it basically interprets itself. It's kind of interesting how this goes on. And the best interpretation of the Bible is what the Bible says. But I will remind you that there will be no other signs, no other wonders between now and the time that the rapture occurs. So we don't know when it's going to happen. There's one other thing that I want to mention to you that I didn't just think of it, I just heard of it today, and I think it's kind of interesting, so I want to pass it on to you. What I'd like you to do is go back to the book of Genesis and read chapter 37. You know what's there? It's the story of Joseph. And what I'd like you to do is, as you read the story of Joseph, compare this to the story of Daniel. They were both dreamers. They both suffered hardships. Daniel in exile, Joseph being thrown in a pit by his brothers, ending up in Egypt as a slave, eventually ending up as the second in command. Daniel ended up maybe not second in command, but very high in the political ranks of the Babylonian Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire. So there's some commonality there. And it's really very interesting. And all I can say about that is if you compare those two, you can find out that God's been up to something. He's up to something here in this church as well. So I want to thank you, and now it is the time. I hope that clears up some of the things, and I hope you're not hanging out there loose, that I didn't pull this together. What I do want you to recognize is that Daniel is a prophet, and his prophecies are valid. So now is the time